share that out with the group for anyone who cannot join today. All right, so as we get started, and I see some faces here that even I have not met, please just type in chat, a couple of prompts here. Let us know if schools and districts in your region are currently going to school face-to-face, kids in buildings, or hybrid, or virtually. And then also, if you have a TV show or podcast that is worth watching, share what it is. Hopefully all of you will have some time off coming up at the holidays in a few weeks, and might be fun to check out some new shows.
And Kelly, this is Lucille. I'll share mine verbally. If anybody hasn't seen a crazy show called Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
You gotta like music.
All right. The other thing I might ask is if everyone could make sure that your name is correct on your little square, and feel free to add maybe the abbreviation for your state afterwards. That'll help us all for those who might be new to the group or are getting to know one another. Ooh, Katie, later we're going to have to be sure to get the transcript of this chat so we can share all these ideas for shows to watch. And of course, also really important is to think about the way in which everyone is operating with education right now, which I see some of you even commenting that it's moving from one way to another and sometimes then back again. Where I live in Pennsylvania, it is all about the data, which is good news. So there is literally a matrix that's informed by lots of different data points, and it changes from time to time. So
Kelly, if I could share a story on schools. There's a school 2 blocks from me, a small school district, LaGrange School District 102, that is doing their own spit tests. They have a virologist on their board. They are doing their own spit test, and they're processing them in their science lab. They had created a science lab a couple years ago out of an empty school building, and now they are still in on their half-day hybrid while everybody else is closing down, and they're sharing it with the other local school districts. So I just thought that was unusual and creative to be doing their own science lab.
For sure. All right, everyone, thanks for taking a minute to type in chat. We are going to give you an opportunity to share with your voice successes and also challenges and roadblocks. We're then going to spend a little bit of time just kind of checking in on the group's thoughts about some of our evaluation tools, and then move into a discussion about ensuring that you have good thinking around uncovering needs. We want to hear what you're already doing, what you've thought about doing. You can talk with one another about some ideas. We're going to share a little bit from a new resource, a TA brief from our center on ideas around screening and universal screening. And then I'm just going to share a quick example from another project outside of this group. And we've got some resources at the end, so we'll make sure that you all have access to this PowerPoint as well. But first, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other a little bit better here. Let us know what seems to be working well so far this school year, and as you kind of look forward to the next few months. We'd like to hear about your successes. And you already heard about Catherine sharing Kentucky's experience at our virtual forum. Certainly, we feel like our virtual forum was a success and definitely something to celebrate. We've gotten some pretty good feedback about it. And I saw Katie put a link to that session in the chat. They're all available at pbis.org, every session from the forum, which I personally appreciate because that way we can go back and listen to them later. And certainly as soon as that session finished that Catherine was sharing in, I had some emails from some folks in other states who were saying, I need to get that recording as soon as possible so I can share it with other people I work with. So let's hear
Kelly,
from you.
we also had Michigan did a very nice job, Allison, in the trauma example when I kicked off the mental health strand using trauma informed as an example of ISF. And I really, I'm blanking on Allison's last name, but I know it starts with an O. Olivo. And then we also had California do a wonderful job in a bit of an interview. We were calling Susan Terry Gross. She was doing the Terry Gross NPR interview thing with our colleagues in Monterey from the county office. We have a mental health administrator who was interviewed around ISF. So the whole mental health strand featured, well, first Michigan, then California, and then Kentucky. So thank you.
Would anyone like to share a celebration or success? You can type in chat or feel free to come off of mute. We'd love to hear your voice.
Well, this is Debbie from Delaware. I can share something. This isn't really like a huge success, but I just wanted to share this as an idea. And I was just texting my group mates to see what we might want to share. But while we're thinking about that, Wednesday, we had all of our district coaches come together to walk through the culturally responsive PBIS field guide, because we noticed that when you send the resources out, people often don't have the dedicated time to actually go through and use them. So, and we asked the district coaches to invite a partner from their district team that was also focused on equity work in particular. So we got some folks that have never come to our sessions, like they might have had an equity lead for the district with their PBS coach, which was really nice. So we dove into some specific examples from the guide. We couldn't cover everything. And I was really pleased with, the guide's wonderful, but also the conversation that it surfaced from the participants and kind of having them use that as a model for how they could then go back to their districts to do the same process. So we just did it Wednesday, so I can't really speak to the outcomes yet because it was so new, but I really appreciate PBIS for providing the resource, and it wasn't a heavy lift because we just created space to have the conversations about how to use it.
That's really awesome, Debbie. Thank you for sharing that. Is there a link to the guide? Yes, Lisa, there is a link to the guide. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Katie.
And I'll add, we put it into a live binder. I'll put that link in there because the guide is overwhelming with all the appendices. There's no way to jump to things. So we made a live binder of it so you can go right to that one piece. And I can put that in the link too, because you're welcome to use that.
Thank you. That's great. Others?
I can share a little bit of what we've been doing. We actually did have about 7 weeks of in-person instruction in our district. So we were able to get the behavior screeners done for K through 8th grade for in-person learners. And then we went virtual right after that. So I've been working with teams on, interpreting that and what that is going to look like for next steps. But I'm new in this position this year. I'm new to this district. So I have been learning a lot about the ISF work. We've created an action plan that I think is probably a little bit more thorough than the district has had in previous years. So I feel like we're doing a lot of good things moving in the right direction. It's just we keep having these hiccups with kids being in and out of instruction.
Mhm. Amy, thank you for sharing. And I'm glad you're here with us today. We might turn back to you in a little bit when we start talking more about screening to hear about your experiences. All right, and I see Katie put the link to the culturally responsive field guide in the chat. And thanks, Debbie, for that live binder. That sounds great. Any other successes to share or celebrations?
I'll share.
Hi, Esther.
Hi, how are you? Good to see everybody. Yeah, we have kind of two groups. The one from the high school district that's working on this particular project, but we also have one of our elementary schools that is implementing ISF. And I mean, it's not a big story other than the fact that, we wrapped up last year distance learning, holding our trainings and meetings virtually. And then, with the new year, it was kind of like, okay, is everybody still going to be really enthusiastic and having the time to do this? And basically with both, they were like, Esther, when are we starting? And what are we going to do now? And what are the next steps? So it was just a good feeling to know that they were feeling like this was something that was, beneficial to having there at their schools. So, and because the elementary school, they hired a whole group of counselors due to ISF and the work that we're doing here in Monterey County. So they have school-based counselors that work exclusively on mental health, and they work with Monterey County Behavioral Health. So we kind of have two teams out at the schools that are working on this, and they were just seeing this as an opportunity to provide some more support to our kids. So it's a good thing when you don't know, are they going to say, oh, I'm too busy now and I'm not interested anymore, versus, hey, this is something really important. We want to do this. So please keep us going. And so just to share some good thoughts, before we break this year. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther. Well, thank you all for those who shared. A few other, just by way of letting you know, there have been some new technical assistance briefs and practice guides, and of course our ebook are all available now at pbis.org. And I mentioned this screening resource, which is very new. I actually think it's only been published here in the last week or two. So we're going to talk about it here in just a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that you all knew that these resources are available on the website. So how about, if we talk a little bit about some stressors or challenges. And there was a graphic on here that I actually borrowed from Catherine Tillett that had a little winding road, but I'm not sure why it's not showing up. So anyway, what have been some of your challenges and roadblocks? And I know that you all have been working with whomever your assigned TA provider is around these efforts and probably have been talking about these things on your other technical assistance calls. But nevertheless, I think it's helpful when you can hear from one another, because maybe someone will have an idea or a similar challenge and can share a brainstorm or an idea about how to address it. So again, I'm going to kind of pause the PowerPoint here just so we can see each other a little bit better. And again, type in chat, come off of mute. We'd love to hear your voice and some of the challenges and roadblocks that you've been facing.
I think sorry, Catherine. This is Sarah from Delaware. I think one thing that's coming up is kind of scheduling concerns and issues when you think about, we may have some established meetings set up with our district folks, but when those calls come from higher up that we need to pivot and shift, that those obviously become the topic that the district folks need to focus on. So I think we've come this. I think that's a roadblock, just that we know that we're not always the priority, even though we know we could be really helpful. So.
Yeah, that's got to be challenging, Sarah, because everybody knows the mental health of kids is everybody's biggest priority. But to invest in building system structures when it feels like you're hanging on by a thread has got it. That's the challenge, right? That's got to be hard. Thanks for sharing that.
Catherine, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say essentially what Lucille just said, and this is of course not surprising to anybody, but everyone's just kind of hanging on by a thread. And so that makes intentional implementation of anything beyond meeting basic emergency needs, I think, really challenging for any of our schools. So, you know, to the extent that people have been able to move forward with this work, it's pretty amazing.
For sure. On the one hand, as Esther was saying, for some, this is, you know, we all recognize now more than ever, we need this work. And yet, you know, to your point, everyone is really thinking about just getting by, right? Just getting through the day and trying to respond to competing priorities that are sometimes, you know, life or death. So thanks for sharing that, Catherine.
Kelly, I would also add that sometimes those competing priorities aren't actually life or death, but they're embedded in the systems and the structures. So one of the things that we're hearing from districts is that while everybody is saying how important SEL and mental health and well-being are, that the folks who are charged with instructional outcomes are still super focused on instructional outcomes and can't seem to pivot away from that. And part of it may be that state structures aren't saying, we're going to adjust this, or we need to relax this, or let's be realistic, or whatever it is. So I think there still are some real challenges just around that issue of, you know, we're saying over and over, if kids aren't ready to learn, it doesn't matter how great your teaching is, even in the virtual space, they're still not going to learn. And they're saying, but we have to teach. So this, and it comes out in things like 20 minutes of programmed SEL in a week, as opposed to embedding social and emotional learning into everything that is happening. You know, so the same old arguments are even now more pronounced and I think more dire.
Sure. Right. Thanks, Miriam. Great point.
I guess I'd like to add to what Miriam's talking about. At the department, we're not only doing ISF, but we're also part of a community of practice to look at, Liz is on the call, and Steve and another colleague, we're looking at the connection between SEL and MTSS. And we're really proud that there's the chance to do that work, to look at, to send the message of integration. As a way to get ready, we ran a survey for the people who are taking the SEL online modules, and of the 400, only one of the 400 that responded in the last month said that they had to drop it because academics are more important. So 392 people said it was right time, right thing to do. There was never a more critical window, which to have you know, that many people in November of a COVID period be able to say that this is really critical was heartwarming and felt like just critical to the ISF work.
Thanks, Lisa. I see Jessica is typing in chat. Oh, and just raised her hand. Jessica, you want to share? Hi. Oh, I think you're on mute, or we can't hear you anyway.
Okay, I used all my social skills, but I couldn't work the mute button. So I think I'm seeing one of the challenges and the celebrations is this idea of emotional leadership by our folks in a position of decision-making power. is that I'm seeing in districts where there's a leader who's saying, I see and feel where you are, and I'm giving you permission very explicitly and a lot. And I get a lot of head nodding because you're experiencing this. And then the other districts where that leader hasn't stepped up yet and given almost permission to feel, and for us to roll back and say, what proportion of our time are we investing in these protective factors? And I love to quote Susan Barrett a lot, but especially an academic success is a protective factor until it's not. So that real show of leadership, seeing and feeling where people are at. I think Steve Goodman, you're really excellent at this. It's that servant leader approach, right? Sherry Luking's also stellar at this. But that's a challenge, and it's also when it's missing, but it's also a huge bonus to the work. I think bonus is the right word, but I think you know where I'm going with that. So that's kind of both sides of the coin at this point.
Thanks, Jessica. And Susan felt bad that she couldn't join us today. She's with another state doing some of the same work. And I know she'll appreciate her shout out when she listens to the recording later. Anything else that's coming up as challenges or roadblocks?
Hi, I'm Heather with Project Aware in Delaware. One thing that I'm noticing as a roadblock is just we're on a timeline with our project. So our project ends in 2023 and we have goals that, we need to accomplish at certain times. So with everything kind of being on pause, I'm just noticing a roadblock of making sure that we have to kind of fluctuate our plan and kind of like pivot around to figure out when we can really accomplish these goals and what makes sense for the districts and not overwhelming them right now with things that are maybe a priority for us, but not a priority for them. So that's a roadblock that I'm running into. Mainly I'm thinking of like our universal screening tool that we're selecting. That's one of our goals for Project Aware, is that all of our districts will be using a mental health screening tool. And that's one thing that really has been disrupted, because right as we were getting the momentum going, we kind of had to pause because the schools stopped going in. So just thinking of things like that, but that's one of the roadblocks I'm seeing.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, for sharing. And of course, that is one of the challenges with grants, is that it's great to help us get started and start to build some capacity to sustain after the grant period ends. And nevertheless, you have some things that you're trying to accomplish that you've written into your goals and objectives. And again, we're going to talk about screening here in a little bit. So we'll have you jump back in onto that part of the conversation as well. Sheila from Michigan has posted a really great question, really for all of you. So I'd love to hear some responses. And I see Jessica typed something in chat as well. But could some of you share a little bit about how you've engaged mental health partners in this work? And do you find success if those partners are recruited or made outreach by the districts? Or what experiences have you had?
Kelly, while people are thinking about that, I'll comment that Chippewa Falls district in Wisconsin, and I think Mulaney's on here somewhere from the Wisconsin team. I got invited to their Zoom district community leadership team, and Mulaney will be there next week, I think. And I just was my heart felt so strong to know they were still continuing to meet with their community partners. They have a rather large team. And by the way, we have a district practice guide about Chippewa Falls and all their family and community engagement. It's not at pbis.org yet, but Kelly or Katie, maybe you could put the link, because I'm terrible at links. Katie's great, in the chat for the district brief that's at midwestpbis.org on Chip Falls. But they're continuing to meet. And Mulaney, you may know more about their community engagement, but the point is they had the community engagement before COVID. They had a community crisis 3 years ago when they started and they coalesced. So I'm thinking they're still strong. Continuing to meet is a big deal, right? Mulaney, anything you know about what's going on there?
Not a lot. I think they're a district around us that has been trying to be face-to-face as much as possible. That's what we're seeing with our bigger districts, and Chip was considered a bigger district where I live. So I think that probably helps that they're not fully virtual, that they're still kind of going through the motions of being in their offices every day for the most part. But they're just continuing to work and look at their data and making sure that they have access to various mental health providers. I think actually one of the last things they talked about in their last meeting in October was that this has opened up a lot of doors for them with virtual therapy type sessions. So they're, as I mentioned in the chat, they're shifting away from that co-located services piece, but they're still doing individual services through mental health providers. And now they have more access to more providers because of people being more comfortable with virtual stuff. So it has been sort of an okay thing.
Thanks, Melanie. You know, and Sheila, I think, you know, for them, they already had mental health providers who were coming into their schools in that co-located way, right? And sometimes that is true. There are some existing relationships or partnerships. And if not, if they're starting from scratch, it's, you know, who in the community could they make outreach to that cares about the work and is willing to roll up their sleeves and partner together, right? How about any other ideas? And I thank you, Heather. I see you've typed something in the chat here as well. Anything more you'd want to add to that? And you certainly don't have to.
Yeah, just that, you know, we really want to make sure the voices are being involved at the table as much as we can. And of course, you know, we can't mandate anything, but we're surely suggesting it and recommending it to our districts because these voices are so valuable, especially right now, since our mental health partners are still working with our students through telehealth and virtual instruction. So just making sure that, you know, those voices are at the table, but we've also done our part in inviting them into things that we're doing. So we've had some of our state agencies join us on our Delaware PBS project, professional learning opportunities, and they've actually come and been speakers virtually as well as in person before this. So just making sure that those voices are there and people know that they're a valuable part of the team.
Can I just add, because Heather, I wasn't even thinking about the virtual counseling webinar we did, but we had our mental health partners lead that, but we invited our PBS, our school mental health providers and our community mental health providers both participated in the webinar. And there were just lots of great ideas for how do you do counseling virtually, but it kind of brought those two communities together, which was another benefit. And I think we have that link on our website. I could put that in the chat box too, but that kind of helped reinforce that we were all working together, those in the community providing mental health and those in the schools.
Mm-hmm. You know, the challenge is to get them to focus on the systems, not just the practices. As Miriam pointed out earlier, you know, that's always been the message of this choir we have in front of us, but there's more of a tendency to just deliver and not build any systems. But you know, the concept of a Zoom DCLT, District Community Leadership Team, might be helpful, you know. And Heather, if they have an MOU, there should be some level of, I'm not going to say requirement, I'm trying to think of the right word, you know, push, encouragement.
Understanding.
An understanding, thank you. To that there will need to be systemic discussions. And the power that happened with Chip Falls, one of the first ones I worked with in Wisconsin 3 years ago, I think we started with them, and was that getting people together to have a shared discussion versus I'll take this school, you take that school, I'll take these kids. So any kind of little leverage or use of Zoom, but you know, and again, changing those MOUs so that it's clear that part of having an MOU, one of the understandings, that's where the U comes from, thank you, Kelly, is about investing time in systemic conversations and action planning for systems. It's very hard because, you know, everybody thinks hook up a kid with a therapy session and I've done my job, you know, and how many hundreds of kids can you hook up? Whoa. Embedded protective factors built into reading instruction. You know, our messages haven't changed. They've just become more validated in their need. and unfortunately harder because of the stress the adults are under.
In Massachusetts, we're kind of meeting districts where they're at, which is many of our districts are concerned about attendance and student engagement. So we're working with them to use an MTSS approach to attendance rather than just the attendance officer sending a letter. It's like, how do you disaggregate that information to be able to come up with evidence-based interventions? We're using a multi-tiered system approach with progress monitoring.
In Kentucky, our connection with our behavioral health providers has progressed a lot like what you've described in from our other states. However, I'll say that for sure, those partnerships are strongest when they're initiated by the districts and specified in their MOUs. So what we did was with one of our early aware districts where they had been able to really build this out and develop a good system and good partnerships and revise their MOUs several times to make sure that they were covering everything they need to cover. That district turned it into a training for their, at that time, I want to say 112 partners, behavioral health partners. So some of them were related to the community mental health system, others were individual providers, but all needed to get kind of an overview of PBIS, ISF, best practices for serving in schools and working with schedules and things like that. So they did that. We've always had great representation from our state behavioral health agency on our state leadership team. Together, some of our state leaders from education and behavioral health turned that district training into one that is adaptable to any district across the state. And we've had a couple rounds now of sharing that information with leaders from our community mental health system with mixed results. And I'll let Miriam jump in if she wants to speak to this at all, but I think the information will probably need to massage it a little bit because our CMHCs are, like everybody else, stretched beyond belief and feel unloved and underfunded and under capacity, and like they can't possibly take on something else and can't see how it will work. So we probably need to work on how we frame and message things a little bit, but we're trying to get the same type of information and expectations, just seeds planted about it through our behavioral health system as well as our education system, so that they're sharing the same messages and have the same types of expectations. Oh, the other thing that came up recently that we're going to be trying to work with is using the statewide networks that speak to our school counselors who have, because of some changes in state legislation, been a little bit confused about what is my role now? Am I a mental health person? Am I not? And how do I work with community providers if they're coming into my school? So that's another avenue that we're hoping to use as to transfer information about ISF and implementation and creating these strong partnerships.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, Sheila, I hope that discussion was helpful.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I think it is. It kind of helps normalize where we are in terms of trying to work with our schools and actually integrate the mental health professionals into our buildings. We're kind of stuck because we're at, first of all, we're in COVID. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to actually engage people. And there becomes other pressing needs, but just knowing that people have managed to work it out, and that, of course, it's not going to be a perfect alignment initially, kind of helps give some hope to where we want to go.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
We probably should just have a little asterisk that, we all know that everything's going to start with because we're in COVID, right? Like, it feels like no matter what it is we're talking about, huh? I know. well, I can't tell you how thankful I am to know that all of you are out there doing this good work and shepherding along the folks that you're working with to support the incredible needs for kids and families right now.
And
It's really-
Kelly, it's in as way of a bit of a summary also, there's a little chat going on about Debbie's approach, Debbie's concept of trying to get people to focus on one thing, you know, the decision roles, who gets on the intervention, how do you know when they need to get off, you know, that in, on, out, and just focus. If there's one thing that can take people more systemically grounded than just tossing practices. I love the pick one thing where you think they're, like Bob said, attendance. Okay, then we're gonna, you know, talk about proactive approaches to attendance. Like pick one thing is kind of the motto, especially Kelly, I think you can relate to that with your 4 children at home doing college and high school. Pick one thing, Kelly, okay?
I might be able to use that metaphor in my mind. Yes, thank you. All right, so with that, and I think with Katie's help behind the scenes here, I was able to fix my PowerPoint. So Catherine, thank you for letting me borrow the graphic. A couple of other things that, you know, I think we just need to acknowledge is that COVID is not the only thing, right? It's not the only challenge that our communities are trying to navigate and manage right now. Certainly, there have been economic impacts because of COVID, and we know that not only has COVID caused those kinds of issues and exacerbated the mental health challenges, but certainly there has been an impact in Black, Brown, and migrant communities or other vulnerable populations, much more so than in other places. And so I know this is something that many of you have on your minds as well. And you know, that we're all trying to think about what are the ways in which we can include these conversations as we're working with leaders in education and mental health so that we can be sensitive and help everyone think about equity related to lots of things, you know, whether that's access to technology and, you know, virtual learning or medical care. Definitely important that we pay attention to all of these factors. Okay, so a little bit of a check-in with all of you. You know, when we first started this work together as part of the model demonstration for ISF, we were not in the midst of a pandemic, and we had some ideas about collecting data such as the Isf Implementation Inventory. And I know that some of you are still using this tool or have been, you know, heretofore, as well as the tiered fidelity inventory and the new both district and state system fidelity inventories. So we'd just like to hear from you, you know, what seems reasonable, and you might not even be able to say today, because who knows what will happen over the next few months or as we move into the spring of the school year. But we still are interested in telling a story about what has been happening as you work towards implementing the ISF in some districts and schools in your states or regions. And we're hopeful that we can at least collect some data that, you know, as I mentioned, there may be an asterisk, but nevertheless, we can speak to what happened just before, what's happening now, and we still have some time over the next couple of years. But I think it's unclear what that will look like. So we'd love for you to weigh in on what you think is feasible, reasonable, as far as expectations around collecting any of this data. So I see that there's some comments in chat, but anyone want to share your thoughts or what you're planning for your sites? I'm going to stop sharing again.
Kelly, we'll be using the ISF inventory here in Monterey County. And kind of as we speak, I've been working with the districts to get the schools set up. Couple of changes in terms of how we kind of operated before and how it's working now. Whereas before we would communicate with you and then you would give us the link, we'd complete the assessment, the inventory, it would go in and then you'd provide the report. So I'm assuming now we haven't gotten to the point yet where we've actually administered the inventory, but I'm assuming there's going to be kind of two files for the schools because there's going to be the reports that they did from before and then the new ones. So I'm assuming that that's how it's going to work because I haven't actually done this yet. Is that the way? So what I'm telling the schools is that we're going to have reports, but typically once they do the assessment again, you know, the new data is tacked on to the old data. So you could see the progress in terms of whether there's growth or they've kind of lost some of that growth. So I've just given them a heads up that it might not all be tied together, but they will have the data from before because I have those reports and then the new ones that'll be coming through Swiss now.
That's great, Esther. It's, you know, the idea here is what's useful to progress. And it's going to be different for everybody. You know, we are not the federal grant officers demanding anything. Of course, we're not giving you any money. We're only giving you TA, right? You know, but the point is what's useful. And then what's nice is if you guys keep letting us know, then we can figure out, and this is where Bob Putnam will help us tremendously, a great writer on our team, help us figure out how to tell the story from what we have, since it's not going to be ideal. So if the ISF inventory or the DSFI or the TFI can help you make progress, then that's what you should do. And if there's something else, and we will talk about screening in a minute, because I think it was Sarah said, was it Sarah? You know, we're supposed to start it everywhere. You know, it's not a great idea to start new stuff in the middle of a world pandemic where we are all freaking out about a lot of other stuff too, you know? So it's like, what's useful is the key. So thank you, Esther, for that. How about others?
We have grant funding for our work here from one of our local foundations. So that's the tool that we're using to report back. But the schools they understand what it's all about. They do their TFIs, so they know that they benefit from completing it, and they can kind of look at those areas where they need to focus on. So definitely.
Others?
I like Jessica's comment in here. Jessica, you want to talk? Can you find that mute button again?
I have skills. Yeah. So we to try to deal with a little bit of the overwhelm that folks were feeling, we really just we kind of started off with a few districts as demonstration sites, and they were feeling really overwhelmed by all the things and felt they had to do all of it. And so we backed out and said, what is the one thing that you want to focus on right now? What's the data point you want to change? And this sometimes we do with high schools, like you want kids to be on time. So we're just going to focus on that data point, at PBS that data point. So we've helped them look at if they want to implement a screener at a district level, what are some very concrete DSFI items that they need to address? They need to meet those benchmarks of implementation in order to do that. So do they have decision rules? Do they have stakeholder communication? So we asked them to bring that thing, and then we went into the DSFI and said, really attend to these items to strengthen the work that you're doing. And that approach seems to be working to help folks feel more focused, feel like they have permission to really make this their own kind of pathway to implementation. And they're moving things along. So it's been a helpful way to really help them narrow their view, because it's hard. They want to do everything, right? They want to do all the things to benefit all the kids. Yeah.
Right. And there are some districts and communities that want to go straight into, let's discuss racism. Let's discuss why we had violence in the street. Let's discuss why some of our kids have generational disadvantage. You know, I mean, so some districts are going straight for hot button items, and some schools are and others are not. So the point about anything that's of value, and you got to have people strong enough to talk about, you know, what it is they want to do. So we're with you on that, Jessica. It's kind of the message and a theme here is, where's the state at? Where's the district at? Where are the people at who live in that community, and what's stressing them? And hopefully there's leaders strong enough to say, okay, we're not going to deal with this today. We're going to deal with what's important to you. So we're going to try to model that. Thank you, Jessica.
Others? Okay. I think we are going to move now to our next discussion, which is the main part of what we wanted to have all of you be able to talk about here today, which is how to use data to uncover need during this context of COVID, and including ideas around screening. And so, as I mentioned, there is this hot off the press technical assistance brief. It's only 3 pages, I believe, and has some guidance about considerations that I hope you'll find helpful. And we really summarized it here in these next few slides. You know, these are the big ideas that have been expanded. The one thing to know is, of course, the universal screening tools that are available were not normed for a pandemic. And so we have to think about, what does that mean if we are going to be using such instruments at this point? And so some of the things to consider, if you already are using a universal screener, you might have to change your time frame. And someone brought up a little bit earlier that, you know, as things are changing quickly and districts are moving from virtual to in-person to hybrid and back and forth again, it might change some of the timelines for all of our work. And the data from those instruments that is received should definitely be interpreted cautiously. You might check with the developers of the instrument to get some guidance directly from them. And I know some districts and states who have done that. So certainly it's a great idea to reach out and get some technical assistance depending on the instrument that you might be using. As always, and this was true even before COVID, we want to encourage you to use multiple sources of data to inform instruction. And so, you know, that means the typical things in schools, the expanded data sets that we've discussed together, like nurse and counselor visits, as well as community data, which now more than ever is really critical to our decision making. Screening is a soft sign that there could be concerns or challenges, and we need to kind of dig a little further into what's happening. And it's really a great time to boost up what we're doing at Tier 1. We want to encourage screening responsibly, informed, and with care is what it says in the brief, and I really like that. So think about, would it be best to get parent-completed or student-completed screening tools rather than teacher? And you have to think about as well the structures and resources for responding once need is identified. So again, the 3 areas that, or the 3 kind of main recommendations here in the brief are what I just summarized, but to dig a little bit deeper, you know, think about if you used to screen, let's say 4 weeks in after the start of school, would you now wait 6 weeks? You know, definitely have some discussions or facilitate some discussions with those who are making those decisions, so that it could be at a time when, you know, if a teacher is going to be completing a rater, that they feel like they can respond because they can speak to what might be happening for students. And of course, if schools are virtual and a teacher is going to be asked to complete an instrument, there might be students whom they haven't had any contact with, either because the students don't show their faces on video or type in chat or use their voices. And so it would be impossible for them to complete a screener. So definitely professional development and technical assistance will need to be provided, and guidance for families or students if we're asking them to complete raters as well.
Kelly, this is Lucille. Good. Your point about attendance as a data point, your point about which kids are not engaging, your point about which kids can't we find. Right. These are examples that we're hearing around the country of very, very relevant screening. And maybe it's as much as a school or district leadership team coming up with a series of 2 to 3 questions to pursue with a kid or a family who's been screened as, you know, not showing up or being very different in their participation. You know, the creativity, but to give the teachers the tools and some continuity for discussion. Reminds me of back in the day, like, I don't know, first time I heard this was probably 15 years ago, where you remember that old strategy, have every teacher name any kid they have a personal contact with every day and then find the kids who nobody named. Remember that one? So that's screening. So, okay, I'm stopped. Go ahead. I couldn't resist.
That's okay. All good. All right. Next point in the brief is, again, that piece about using multiple data sources. And again, thinking about what might a risk indicator mean or not mean. In the example I'm going to show you here in a little bit, it was with middle school students, and the students were completing the raters on themselves. And lo and behold, many students said, we're feeling socially isolated. You know, that makes a lot of sense, and it's very developmentally appropriate. And what could the school do at tier 1, the district to do at tier 1 to help boost up supports and make those connections for kids so that they feel better connected to their peers? You know, so we have to kind of take things with a grain of salt if we're using a universal screener, and really examine what the data might be trying to tell us, especially during this unusual time. And so here are some various data points that you might consider, and those that we have talked about, as I said, in kind of traditional learning mode, and some additional data points for distance learning. You know, there may or may not be things like office discipline referrals. However, there could be lack of engagement in instruction, especially if students are in remote or hybrid. We might need to figure out ways that we can do wellness checks for families and students. And we are going to have to think about our requests for assistance process, especially if students aren't in school every day. You know, how are we going to encourage them to reach out if they need help, or families to reach out if they need help? And so, you know, really important for us to kind of broaden the lens and the data that we're going to be reviewing together. And then again, as I said, the third point here is we might have to change the way in which, if you are using a universal screener, that you're getting responses, and what we're going to do with that information once it's received. You know, so for example, if you're trying to hit those marks on the screener, you don't have to be using a universal screening instrument. You know, certainly that is a goal, And I think it's on a slide here coming up. If you're not already using one, now is not the time to start, right? It's not the time to add anything new. And so how can we connect with families, make sure that they understand there are resources and help available, and how they could tell us if there's a concern, letting them know about interventions at tiers 2 and 3 that are available, and then trying to encourage that bi-directional communication, especially if they're worried about something to do with their child.
And Kelly, and as you mentioned, let's just make some assumptions here. Tier 1 has needs in it that it never did before at this volume in certain school districts. And we have to help schools not be overwhelmed at the requests for assistance by encouraging them to strengthen the tier 1 with the protective factors and normalizing for kids that stress and anxiety and social isolation are what we're all feeling, and what this Miriam said earlier, never been a better way or time for integration of SEL at tier 1. Because if you don't do that, the requests for assistance are going to be at 80 and 90%, right? Just wanted to say the obvious. Sorry.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So again, big ideas, go back to the basics, use your data, connect with students and families. It's not the time for adding something new. This is in a lot of our return to school guidance, which Susan and Steve Goodman and others from our center helped put together. It's important for the district community leadership teams to establish the routines and procedures for screening. We also have to be thinking about, and some of you mentioned this, who's at risk and needs support with basic needs like food and shelter, or technology like internet and computers. We have to be thinking about connection and relationships between students and adults, students to students, the mental wellness of adults, our teachers and administrators, those who are, I think probably exhausted, and that's an understatement. The superintendent of my own kids' district, each video he sends out, and it's more than one a week with the updated guidance, he sounds a little more and more tired, and it's just real. And so we have to take all of that into consideration. And then the other part of it is the systems for responding. And so we're going to touch on that just a little bit as well. But before we do that, I thought we could take a pause here for some discussion, because I know you all are thinking about these things, and some of you mentioned, and Amy, I certainly don't want to put you on the spot, but would love to hear about the experience in Woodford or others as you've been kind of wrestling with these ideas about screening and uncovering student need.
Can you all hear me? I got a message.
Yes.
Okay, that was a little soft last time. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we were fortunate enough to have 6 weeks of instruction. And so just from the get-go, we said, if we have 6 weeks, we want to do the universal behavior screener for our in-person students. So all of our schools, K through 8, agreed to participate in those. And so we just sent them out via Google to the teachers. That person previously in my position had already had kind of that system set up, so they were used to it. I did make like a little screencastify video to explain to any new teachers in the district how to complete that if they weren't familiar with it. And I mean, it was easy. Of course, with Google, everything comes right back to you immediately. So I was able to get those results very quickly and get the data back to the schools within a couple of days. And then we went virtual right after all that happened. So I've been meeting with the counselors in the buildings to talk about, again, I always preach to them, we don't use one source of data to make any decisions. So, just thinking about what does this mean? Of course, it, it highlighted some teachers rated everybody in their class as being, those moderate and high level behaviors. So maybe we need to look at some tier 1 level things in those classes, or what can we do to support that particular teacher. But yeah, I mean, it was very well received. They've been using the SRSS for many years in this district. So, I mean, it's something they're comfortable with. They appreciate the results of it. They appreciate the data from it. And, we're able to use it as a data source for making decisions.
Thank you for sharing, Amy. Appreciate that. Others?
I'll jump in. I love everything that you shared, Kelly, because I feel like it really aligns with what we're doing in Delaware, and I can't wait to share that document with the other members of our team. But basically, especially with Project Aware, when we first started this work with screening, we got our state committee together and we were looking at different screening tools. And in our head, we were going to pick out a screening tool and like let all of our districts see a tool. And as we started talking, the more and more we realized we shouldn't be preparing the districts by giving them a tool to use. We should be preparing them by helping them figure out a process that they can use to identify their own screening tool. Because like you just shared, the districts and schools already have all of the screening. They take data on everything. So they have screening, coming out of their ears, they've got screening. So we don't really need to give them more stuff, but figure out how to use what they currently have and figure out what are we missing. So what we were able to do in Delaware is come up with a exploration and installation guide for them to help examine what they currently have and figure out what they're missing. And through that, they were able to, one district, for instance, was able to identify that they were missing students with internalizing mental health challenges because they were not exhibiting any kind of behaviors outward, and they didn't have any type of behavior or academic issues that were popping up. So they really wanted to identify a screening tool that would help them dig in more to those intrinsic behaviors that students weren't showing, but still needed help to identify their mental health challenges. So that was just an example of one district though. And they did that by looking at their current screening data, looking at their school climate survey data, looking at the Delaware State School Survey data, and really looking at all these different angles and saying, hey, this is what we're missing. And then we were able to bring tools to them and say, hey, these mental health screeners might help you identify what you're missing. And that's how they were able to find it. So we really looked at all of the different resources that we had and created this process for them to follow instead of just giving them a tool to use, because that didn't seem like a really fair option once we started digging into it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Hey, I'd like to thank Heather. I thought that was really helpful. Katie Pullman and I here are supporting a state level conversation in Illinois. And the task we were asked to do was help select a bunch of screeners that we could recommend to districts. That was the task. And so we've gone through the very slow process of convincing the rest of the group that that's the wrong question to ask. And I think what you just shared is exactly where we have gotten them to, which is let's look at the process of installation, because if picking the screeners is going to just reveal all the other fundamental issues they have underneath, or these districts are not ready for screening. So Heather, if you wouldn't mind sharing, we're right at the cusp of wrapping up some of those, but I'd love to compare some of the stuff that we've come up with what you did in Delaware. That'd be great.
It's very parallel to, again, I go back to what Miriam said earlier, it's not about choosing an SEL curriculum. It's about creating a process to integrate protective skills and factors into what you teach. It's the same thing with the screening tools. You jump to the tool. I just loved it, Heather. That was a nice adjustment, and nice focus, because it's about the process. And when you talk about the process, that's when it comes up to, if you think of the hexagon tool, for a minute, how realistic is this that we're going to be able to pull this off right now? Oh, nobody's ever screened before? Then let's use natural existing data sources and help people have follow-up questions for kids at risk. It just helps so much to stick with process. And, again, this is not new for anybody here. It's just a little harder to stay consistent with the message of process and systems versus tools and practices, right? And Brian, congratulations at being invited into that conversation in Illinois. That's huge.
Well, we said we would love to join that conversation, and then we've slowly taken it over, as we do.
You know, and I think the other part about that is this is not unlike when someone says, you know, just give me a name of a curriculum, name of an intervention, you know, give me a list of things to address trauma. But that process of selecting what's going to best match the context is what's most important. And so whether that's an intervention or we're talking about a universal screener, that's really where we want to focus the discussion. So that's awesome. And thanks, Debbie, for putting that in the chat. Bob Putnam, I'm loving all of the things that you're adding in chat. Do you want to summarize or share anything else there?
So we're doing some research on improving engagement in virtual settings. There's with the literature search we've done, there's very little research on this. There is with college students, but not necessarily when you look at elementary, middle school, or high school students. So we have an observation tool we've used about 20 years in live settings, and we're trying to look at how we can adapt that to virtual settings. And one of my doctoral students, this is her doctoral dissertation, is looking at improving engagement in virtual settings. So these are some of the draft kind of operational definitions as we've looked at in terms of virtual. We use a partial interval scale, like for 15 seconds, we can look at somebody every 15 seconds and determine whether they're on task, or we do it class-wide where we're looking at kind of one student at a time to be able to do that. So we're kind of just beginning the research down this road. So we're validating a tool at this point in time to see whether it's socially valid. So this is the direction we're going.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bob. Any other comment? Oh, sorry.
Anyone that's interested in that, we'd love you to be part of our team. So
cool. Other comments or questions so far for the group? It's a great discussion today. I am going to go back to the PowerPoint here now. And again, that sort of second piece is now what, right? Whether you're using a universal screener or finding other ways to uncover need, then we're going to need, and this is back to those, it was mentioned already, the decision rules, right? How will we know if we need to do something at tier 1 or a targeted or intensive intervention? And then what will we monitor while students are in an intervention, and when will we know they're ready to exit, right? And so I think that all of these are things that you're familiar with. We felt like it was important to just put this in here today because it's always important to make that connection, right? We know that there is greater need, and we're going to have to really hone in on intentionally our data so that we can boost up tier 1. We certainly know that that is something we are going to need to do, and then have that streamlined process for using our data. And as Lucille was saying, that requests for assistance are the exception to the rule because we're able to identify students through data. So there's a couple of samples in here, and interventions certainly look different if students are in hybrid or remote learning. And some of you mentioned that in your sites, there are interventions being delivered virtually, which I know has been a challenge for folks to even sort out related to confidentiality and a timing when to get kids in virtual intervention. So, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. So I'm gonna stop sharing again here for a moment, just so we can talk a little bit about your experiences or what guidance you're giving to your districts and schools about, you know, how to deliver interventions and progress monitor. And yes, Sarah, we will make sure to share the slide deck. And Katie's going to put it in the chat. Thanks. But we'll also send it out with the recording to the whole group.
And by the way, Katie put in chat, I asked her what tools we had. I couldn't remember in volume 2 around screening. One of the things in the installation guide in volume 2 that she linked is it's a timeline. And, you know, to start from scratch, the timeline has all the tasks in it. And that may be a reminder to people, okay, we're not ready to bite on this if we haven't done it before. So what's a way we can use existing data sources? You know, that whole idea of don't bite off more than you can chew, and know how big the bite is before you attempt to take it. So maybe that timeline will help.
Good thinking. Thanks, Katie, and thanks for putting the PowerPoint in there as well. So I'm just going to share this example with you. We thought that it might be helpful to just hear how a district has gone through the process, and it turned out to be even better that Amy was able to share what they have done in Woodford, which really sounds like they were able to use the process they already had for the start of the school year because kids were coming into school, and they were able to keep it consistent with what they had done in prior school years, which is wonderful. That certainly I know has not been the case in other places. So I just thought I would share with you a little bit about what's happening in Duval County. This is Jacksonville, Florida, and we have a research project there. And so that's why I was able to pull together this kind of just quick example. And we are using interconnected systems framework, and then the research study is looking at addressing disproportionality in discipline. So I just wanted to give a little context for the project, and certainly down the line we'll have more to share about this. But nevertheless, they use the BIMUS in this district, and what they did was had students complete the self-report version, and guidance was provided by the district leadership to the schools about what to do with the data. And so I just put this quick screenshot of one of the pieces of that guidance, which has to do with a question around risk for suicide. And then they had kind of a gated process for assessing further the risk there, and also connecting kids to some intervention. So, this is kind of one quick snippet about the guidance, but nevertheless, it is really important for the district community leadership team to think about all of the aspects that need to be considered, as we've been discussing today, related to this process. And then another thing that happened was that both their Tier 1 team was addressing what they needed to do to boost things at Tier 1, as well as the Tier 2, Tier 3 team reviewing those students who were in the some risk, at risk category in areas with other data that they had. So just like we talked about today. But I think it's always helpful to just kind of put a real example to some of the things that we're talking about. And I mentioned this earlier, but as I said, in that category for social, in this particular school, it was almost 60% of kids who said, we're feeling socially isolated. And it's quite telling, and again, to me, seems very developmentally appropriate. So how do we respond in a way that normalizes that thought and that feeling for young people, especially at the middle and high school level? And then this was just a sample of some of the discussion at they call it the collaborative problem solving team. So they're looking at tiers 2 and 3. I just thought you might find it helpful to see kind of how it plays out in real time at the school level. All right, before I go to resources, are there other comments, questions, things that anyone wanted to bring up to the group today? This is really meant for you all to hear from one another, and I feel like I'm talking quite a bit. So I want to pause and see if you have anything else on your mind that you want to raise for the group today.
Kelly, this is Jessica. I was just putting in the chat pod, Kelly, I really like the back and forth way you've organized the webinar. And then you said, I think I'm doing all the talking.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great discussions, honestly. Katie, Amy, and I have done some trainings this week, and it feels like the closer we get to the holidays, and I think you all have alluded to this, folks are joining trainings and it's silent, very silent,
Yeah.
not a lot of participation. You all, I think, have had a really robust discussion today, so I'm feeling pretty excited about that. But thank you, Jessica.
Well, I did, and I just dropped into the chat pod. Some of you've seen this already, but it's a study out of California, and it's called "Are the Kids All Right?" And it looks at how this is the pandemic is impacting our adolescents in particular. This is a California sample, but the bottom line is that our kiddos are experiencing grief. They're actually experiencing something like grief, and they're going through those stages. And I thought that was really helpful information. There's some basic recommendations at the end. I always like something that's strategy focused, like solution focused. There's some basic strategies at the end. And I think that those would be nice ways for schools and districts to think about focusing their expectations and reinforcement systems is more closely aligned with those things.
You know, thank you, Jessica. I was just searching for that document. It's an awesome document, and I've shared it with some parents that I know in our community that have said to me, you know, my kids are like overwhelmed with screen time. They've never had any like stress before. And I've found the parents have liked it. It's a little heavy reading for all people, but it's not too much. And the strategy part is really good, but it helps the parents, you know, some kind of parent support thing. It would be really useful. And I shared it with my niece who's struggling with her kids in virtual learning. It's one of my favorite documents of the month is that one from California. So.
Well, I shared it with my own kiddo and my own freshman, and it really did help for her normalize that this is so challenging. Because we know that, I mean, you know, I wouldn't go back in time and be 14 again. It seems it's an isolating period in terms of development, and we see, you know, the kids are seeking social connection. So I have a freshman. I know it seems a little crazy, but I almost wonder if I think a parent group is great, and I wonder how many kids we could pull excerpts from it in terms of a high school. We could pull out bits and pieces and share it with our kiddos to try to normalize what's going on for some of them.
You know, I actually recommended to one of my friends, I know her daughter who's 16, and I said, you might want to let her read this. She might appreciate this. It's, you know, so I'm on the same page with you. Might be something also Amy Flamini might want to share with the high school group.
Yeah.
It's very adolescent focused, and it's just really a well done piece.
Awesome. Thank you.
I just put a similar document in the chat. This was actually conducted and analyzed and put together by a student voice team here in Kentucky of their peers, and talking about their experiences with remote learning and the isolation and whatnot. And results is what you would expect, but it's from their perspective.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Well, the last thing really is to share a few resources, and I'm going to guess that most all of you have seen these already, but certainly here are links right in the PowerPoint to the mental health strand from the virtual forum. As we said, the entire forum, all sessions are available at pbis.org. And I think you all by now know that the ebook, the second volume of the monograph, is available at pbis.org in its entirety. You can still get the chapters separately at Midwest if you're interested in looking at it that way. Oh, but here's the slide that tells you that. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. And These are those new practice guides. So Katie put the district community level guide in the chat. There is also one for the school level, and then that trauma practice guide, which I mentioned at the start of our time together. So there are links in the PowerPoint to each of those. And those second two aren't yet at pbis.org, but the trauma one is. So you'll find it there as well. And as you all know, we have these fact sheets. Sometimes these are helpful to share with families and other stakeholders who may not have been as close to the work that you're doing as they might be now because of the varied learning scenarios. And so they might be helpful things to kind of pull out of your pocket, so to speak, and share. And if you didn't already know this, the ISF Implementation Inventory, it's now been moved to the field test site for PBIS assessment, which is where the district system fidelity inventory and state system fidelity inventory have been for about a year now. But it is available at Midwest with a recorded video that Dr. Johnny Splett and myself shared on how to use the instrument and the manual if you're going to be facilitating that with any of your schools. And if you don't think you or someone on your team has access to the field test site, just let us know and we can work with the team at University of Oregon and get you the access that you need if you have schools who are interested and ready to complete that instrument. For example, Esther, you've had your schools continue to use it out in Monterey. And, you know, again, this is kind of one of those things back to the discussion about what do you think is feasible, you know, just keep in touch with us, with your TA provider, and let us know how we can help with all of those tools and that navigation. So here is just to let you know how to get access to the DSFI. There's a hyperlink in the PowerPoint and it's available at pbis.org. The next time we are connecting is after the new year, after the inauguration of our next president. I don't know why that popped in my head, but there, I just said it out loud. And so we will be in touch with information about that. And, you know, don't hesitate to reach out by email or in any way that you feel you need to. We're here to help. I do hope that you all, you know, continue to be well and get some rest over the holidays so that we can gear up for the second semester of the school year. But we've got about 5 minutes. So if there are final thoughts or questions or anything else anyone wants to share, you're welcome to do so. Yes, thank you, Linda. All right. Well, we'll stick around, but if there's nothing else, you are happy to get 4 minutes back into your day. And thank you so much for your active participation today. This is a great discussion.
Great to see all your faces. Thanks so much. Miss seeing you in person, everybody.